Hi, this is Dr. George Sachs, clinical psychologist and ADHD and productivity expert. And I'm here today with Alan Brown. Welcome, Alan. How are you?
I'm doing great, and it's great to be here with you.
Alan is a productivity coach and host of Crusher TV. You also teach productivity hacks to crazy busy professionals and entrepreneurs. Is that correct?
That is correct. Bring them to me. I will teach them.
And I am also aware that you are the #1 best-selling author of Zen and the Art of Productivity, and a featured speaker in the US and Europe, including TEDx you did.
Yep.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about, the topic is how to beat procrastination with 6 mental shifts.
Yeah.
And so we look forward to hearing how you've developed a philosophy and a program to overcome procrastination.
Yeah, you know, when you think about procrastination, we often don't think about psychology, let alone evolution. We think about motivation, willpower, laziness. And the reality is we are actually evolutionarily programmed to procrastinate. Now, I won't dive into that other than to say that, we still have the same brain that we did 200,000 years ago, when it was all about, look, if we don't have to do anything, let's not expend any energy, because we need to save our energy for when we actually do need to go out and hunt down some food or escape from a lion. So we were programmed, and still are, to avoid discomfort, always seek rest, always seek relaxation, etc. But also, psychologically speaking, and emotionally speaking, procrastination is very much about what's going on in here. And I'm going to share what I call the 6 psychological barriers to action. And then I'm going to share some hacks to help you break through each and every one of those.
Wonderful. Okay. I look forward to hearing.
All right, good. So I'm going to jump right in here. And again, knowing that procrastination is really about the psychology up in here, and avoiding, pain and discomfort, and making sure that, we're always seeking rest. It is not about laziness, right? If we were lazy, it means we don't care. But the fact that, for instance, people are watching this here today, it's because they do care. And if you're watching because the topic was procrastination, you do care. So I just want to make that clear too. It's not about it's not about laziness. For someone with ADHD like me, it can be very much about the neurochemistry that is there or not there. And that adds to the problem, but it still can be beaten with some psychological, what I call mind shifts or mental shifts. So here's sort of a roadmap of where we're going to go. These represent the 6 psychological barriers to action that everyone here is going to identify with. So here's the first one: perfectionism, right? Just a couple of quick examples are, I'm not going to start on this because I haven't figured out exactly how to do it just right. Or more broadly, we feel, well, I'm not going to be able to do that well. I'm just going to fail, so I'm not going to bother starting, right? So there's a couple of examples of perfectionism. I'm sure everybody can resonate with that on some level. The next one is temporal discounting. And some of you may have heard of this. Temporal refers to time. Discounting refers to how we value less those things that are farther out into the future, right? So the 32-year-old saving for retirement values socking away that money every month for retirement a lot less than the person who's 53, 54 years old. Then it's like, oh man, I got to get busy. And on a micro level, it's much the same thing. I still have 3 weeks to get that thing done. No big deal. Versus, oh my God, 3 days, that thing is done. Why didn't I work on this sooner? Or even worse, oh my God, 3 hours. Now I got to study for that exam, or now I got to finish that project. So that's temporal discounting. And by the way, temporal discounting, an easy way to remember this, it's your present self screwing your future self. All right? And I'm going to come back to that theme. All right. The next is, and I love this. I just put up this little mug here that I found. It says, "Tomorrow, a mystical land where 99% of all human productivity, motivation, and achievement are stored." right? Because we think, and this is, by the way,
So
it's kind of,
true.
it kind of is part of, it's an example of irrational avoidance too. You know, we do this thing where, well, you know, tomorrow everything's going to be fine. Everything's going to be better. I'm going to be more in the mood or whatever that is. So that's one example of irrational avoidance, but it's also classic temporal discounting. But other examples of irrational avoidance are, well, I can't really start on that because I have to go ask somebody for this thing. And, you know, it's, they're going to think I'm an idiot, or they're going to hate me for asking. Or another example of irrational avoidance is, well, you know, it's going to take me way too long to do it, so I really can't start it tomorrow because blah, blah. Or we'll also do a million little things like, well, let me do this first, or let me do that first. There's a whole bunch of irrational things we do that help us avoid, give us an excuse to avoid starting on, especially something difficult, right?
Uh-huh.
The last three are really my favorites because they really represent kind of I think the bulk of the issues here. So here's where do I start? Not knowing where to start. This is especially the case on really big, complex things, right? Big projects, lots of moving parts, other people involved, multiple timelines. It's like, I don't even know where to start. That could even be the case with a tough email that you have to write, you know? I don't even really know how to open up the, you know, what the greeting should be, or, you know, what the first paragraph is. And so because we don't know where to start, we don't start at all. You know, we're going to come back to each of these with a little hack for each and every one of them. Here's a big one. It's hard. And again, especially if you're someone like me with ADHD, there are so many things that we do, so many of the important things that we need to do, like those quadrant 2 things, you know, from the Covey matrix, that, you know, those things that are really going to move us forward, they tend to be hard things. If they weren't hard, we'd all be Richard Branson, right? But, you know, we think about something, and just because there's this general sense of, well, that's really hard, let me do that tomorrow, or I'm going to come in early on Monday and work on that, or I'm going to devote the weekend to that, or whatever. And then some other reason comes up for us to procrastinate on it. But it's hard is a really big reason why we procrastinate. Here's an interesting one: indifference. This is on things that are relatively easy. We know how to do them. We know how to get them started and how to finish them, but they just don't fire us up. Laundry, getting the oil changed in our car, you know, getting the car washed, yard work, you know, things that for, let's say, a neurotypical person, or just someone who is, let's just say, very buttoned up, they could get all excited about, oh yeah, oh man, I love doing laundry. I can't wait to see them all crisply folded and all that. That really gets me going. For lots of us, mundane stuff just isn't interesting. It's just so mundane that we can't get our brain chemistry fired up to do it. So with that, let's talk about what some of the solutions might be. All right, and again, starting right back from the first one, perfectionism. So, you know, let's just sort of summarize the perfectionist tendency as being one of, you know, I got to figure it all out first. I got to get it all figured out first, so it's just right. And again, whether that's writing an email or writing a report or you know, a big project, I got to have it all figured out just right. That's in itself, it's kind of an irrational avoidance, but it's understandable because we don't want to fail. We don't want to send off that email and have it be embarrassing or whatever. But it shouldn't keep us from at least starting. Right? And here's the trick, and you'll forgive my French, even though it's actually going to be English. The trick is shitty first draft, or SFD.
I like that. I like
yeah.
that.
And this simply means, look, I don't know how to do it perfectly, but I do know how to start, right? I'm just going to start, and I'm just going to draft this thing. And again, whether that's a project, whether it is a tough email, or you know, any of a number of things that we get perfectionistic about, we just start and we just do a crappy first draft and just let it go, let it flow. I did an episode of Crusher TV. I forget what episode number it was, but the title of it is 6 Ways to Make Your Writing Easier, Faster, and Better. And it comes in part from the good fortune I had of being trained as an advertising executive early in my career, the agency brought in a writing coach. This guy is, interestingly, his name was Jean Plumet. Plumet meaning pencil or pen, I think, in French. So it was so appropriate that he was a writing coach. But the main thing that he taught was just do a crappy first draft. And the way I teach it is, and here's my pet unicorn here, my barfing unicorn. So what I say to folks is, look, just barf it out. Just barf out whatever you need to get out on. Just get it out of your brain and onto the page. There's a wonderful hack. Ernest Hemingway always said, write drunk, edit sober. Just get it out. So there's a great hack for beating perfectionism. Let's talk about temporal discounting. Temporal discounting, as I mentioned, is taking care of your present self, right? So, here's my phone over here. Present self says, hey, present self, you know what? Let's not worry about that thing right now. There's some time. Let's just get into this. Let's do some Facebook or some Instagram. Or, hey, present self, let's watch some Netflix. All right, let's do that because we got plenty of time on that other thing. Meanwhile, future self, the person who in 3 weeks is going to be sitting there going, why didn't you start this 3 weeks ago, right? It's tax time, right? Why didn't you start this, 6 months ago? So we need to switch from present self-care to future self-care, right? And there is considerable research evidence that when we just take the moment to think about our future self and how our future self will feel in the future when that deadline comes, it actually improves our ability to take action and get out of this procrastination rut. So switch from present self-care. You got to be able to recognize it first, of course. Hey, I know what I'm doing. I'm sitting here going, I know I got 3 weeks, so I don't have to worry about it. But I also know deep down, I know that in 2 weeks, I'm going to say the same thing. In 1 more week, I'm going to say that, so switch from present self-care to future self-care. So let's talk about irrational avoidance. And irrational avoidance is all based on any number of irrational thoughts, things that if we just were to pause and just ask, well, is that true? Is that really true? I don't know if anyone out there has heard of Byron Katie, but she's famous for helping. Have you heard of her?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. She's amazing. And she made a name for herself by simply helping people to ask a question, whether they're in relationship issues or life issues. She would just ask, well, is that true? Is it true that your husband doesn't love you? Is it true that somebody is going to make fun of you for this or that? Is it true that there's going to be some ugly confrontation when you go and ask someone for something, et cetera? And, another one, you can actually apply this also to temporal discounting. Well, I've got 3 weeks, no problem. Well, is that true? Is it true that it's no problem? Because if you really know yourself, you will agree that it's not true. So there's your hack, if you will, for anything that involves a lot of this, any of this kind of irrational avoidance or irrational thoughts. So now I want to get to the three biggies, my three favorites here. And when we're confronted with these big hairy projects or really difficult, tricky emails or any kind of tough writing, we often try to figure it out up in our head, right? And let's just say, well, this is not much of a to-do list for today because I'm doing a lot of video today, but let's just say that this was one of my to-dos today and that it's a really complicated, big thing. We think that if we just stare at it long enough, if we just kind of look at that those just the words on the paper, let's see, I'm going to figure this out first. I got to figure out where I'm going to start. Where do I start? That's not how you figure out where to start. The way you figure out where to start is to just start, right? As Stephen Pressman, who wrote The War of Art and a couple of other great little books that you may have heard of, he says, start before you're ready. Or as I put it, start tiny anywhere. So example, I just did a group coaching thing this morning, and not surprisingly, a number of people are backed up on their taxes. They're avoiding their taxes, right? Because we're early in the year. But the trick is to not think that I have to finish this thing. I don't have to finish my taxes. All I have to do is start on them. And so what's the tiniest way I could start on that? Well, I could go and grab that box of receipts or whatever it is, or I could go and grab that folder, or just break it. I could just open my laptop and, open up my spreadsheet or whatever that is, or just grab, my pen and paper. Whatever that is, whatever the tiniest thing is that could represent the starting on that thing. And it doesn't matter where you start. So you just start anywhere. And the beauty of this is, first of all, that when you look for something tiny, it breaks down the barrier way low, right? It makes it much easier. All I have to do is just start with any tiny thing. And then when you're willing to start anywhere, when you put those two together, what you've just done is you've started, which is the opposite of procrastination. Just starting is the opposite of procrastination. And what happens 9 times out of 10 when you just start? You keep moving forward. And more importantly, you start to see how it will get done. How will it get done? Well, you know what? Now that I've started, I can actually see, well, yeah, this has to come over here, or this paragraph should really be over here, et cetera. And there's a wonderful quote by Dr. Martin Luther King. He says, you don't have to see the whole staircase. Just take the first step.
Okay.
And once you take the first step, what happens? Now you can see another step out there. Now you go up another step, and now you can see a few more steps. That's what it's all about. And that is the gift that you give yourself by just starting tiny anywhere. So that's a really powerful thing. And I invite everyone to try that on any tough thing where you don't know where to start. All right. Next is another one of my favorites. This is hard. Again, so many of the things that are in our quadrant 2, so many of those things that we know will really move us forward, that we really have to get done, are hard. Otherwise, we would have started them. But one of the things that we don't ever really do when something is hard, we just kind of keep that it's hard in the back of our mind without ever really questioning, well, what is hard? What exactly is hard about? Why is it that I'm avoiding this thing? Because it could be any of a number of different things. So for example, if there's something on one of my websites that needs attention, that's hard for me because technology is not my forte. I do have other people that work on that, but even just writing out what it is that I want to have done or what the problem is, that's hard. And then I have to get other people involved. So if I can just go, I know why that I'm not doing it. I know why I'm putting that off, because it's hard, right? It's hard for that reason. A lot of times there will be some kind of confrontation involved in the doing of something. Well, I have to go and ask so-and-so for that thing. By the way, everyone procrastinates. Oprah Winfrey was interviewed in Inc. magazine, I think, and she talked about procrastination. She procrastinates. And she says she procrastinates most on anything that involves any kind of confrontation, e.g. having to say no, right? Because you can imagine that she is asked all the time by all kinds of powerful and famous people, hey, Oprah, can you get involved in this? Will you do that? Will you do that? And she has to say no more than say yes, right? And so she admits that procrastinating when it comes to some kind of confrontation. So if we can recognize that when we are procrastinating on something, especially something that requires delegation or asking a favor of someone, well, that's why it's hard. You can at least now zero in on making that part easier or taking that on. Another thing that might be hard about it is, well, geez, it occurs to me, I really need to have 3 hours of free, unencumbered, interrupted time to be able to do this. That's why I haven't been starting on this. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to schedule some time, blah, 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 blah. So I think you get the idea. So on the last one here, which is indifference, the thought, of course, is, it's just boring. I would just rather, you know what? Instead of going down to that filthy basement and getting in that smelly laundry, I'm just going to get into this and do a little Instagram and check the news headlines, check the sports scores one more time, and then maybe I'll be interested in doing it. But that never happens, right? And then it's only when we reach, the pile of laundry hits the ceiling, or, our expenses, right? Expense reports, administrative stuff, great examples of it just doesn't light me up. But when it piles up and the CFO is like, dude, we're not going to reimburse you for any of that stuff. as of January 31st, screw you, that's when we go, okay, now it's really interesting to me. So the trick here is to realize that everything has inherent value. Everything has inherent value. Whether it's, so for instance, in my past, I was a drug addict and a drunk, and it took me 10 years to get a 4-year degree. And in that time, I crashed a lot of cars. And I had a 1981 Buick Regal that was in beautiful condition when I got it. By the time I got rid of it, it was all banged up, had black primer all over it. And the engine had seized and had to be rebuilt because I just kept ignoring the oil light.
Yeah.
That was another world. I was undiagnosed with ADHD, and plus I was a drug addict, and there was all kinds of problems with that. But if we think about, I think about now, I get my oil changed in my truck, like once every 6 weeks, man. I'm crazy about it because I love my truck and I want it to last forever. And that's the inherent value of going to the trouble of going to get my oil change. Now, I know that sounds mundane, but that's the whole point. There is inherent value of doing your laundry and having it folded and having it look a certain way, having your kids be delighted to have their stuff organized or whatever, if you happen to be a mom or a dad, and not be, seeing piles of undone clothes, which reminds them of, how mom or dad doesn't have their stuff together, et cetera. But you can think of a lot of, expenses. There is value in those expenses. Those expenses are worth money. So if you think about the money that those expenses are worth to you, my God, that's $700 in travel expenses that is not sitting in my bank account. It is sitting in their bank account, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the barriers to entry and some hacks for each one. And I'm sure you want to dive into this a little bit but before we do, George, I just want to share one of my favorite quotes in the world. And it comes from a guy named Jonathan Butcher, who I regard as kind of the American Richard Branson, but no one's ever heard of him because he keeps a very, very low public profile. In fact, if you Google him, you won't find him. But he's a friend and he's a serial entrepreneur, and he's an amazing, amazing guy. And he says, the actions that lead to an extraordinary life are small and easy. And so for everyone out there who's struggling with procrastination or prioritization or time management or overwhelm or whatever it is, just know that little things like some of the hacks that I just shared, if you just can grab onto one or two of these and just bang away at them every day, you're going to start to see your to-do list begin to shrink. You're going to feel your bandwidth start to open up. Your energy is going to rise and all this stuff. And if you keep doing a bunch of these little things, again, I'm somebody who came from drug addiction, academic failure, flopping around for many years of my life, with a very severe case of ADHD. And all I do, and I have a really extraordinary, wonderful life, and all I do is just keep banging away at these little things that are actually relatively easy. So I'll just leave it at that and hand the mic back to you, George.
Well, I thank you very much. It was a really cohesive, well thought out plan there. The ones that stuck out for me were the future self, imagining what it would feel like at the last minute to not to have to rush and scramble and get something done with a deadline. So that was very helpful for me. Imagining the stress if I don't start now.
Yeah, and again, there is considerable research that says that just by sort of closing your eyes and envisioning that future you, and envisioning and feeling that stress and feeling that, that kind of embarrassment. By the way, I for many years after college, until only about 2 or 3 years ago, I had a recurring nightmare. And it was the nightmare of running around the halls of the university, trying to find someone who was smart and who had been attending class like I wasn't, and try to get their notes or whatever. And then running around trying to, trying to have the courage to walk into a class on finals day after not having shown up for the class for 6 weeks. That was a recurring. So if I can call that
was
up.
Reality for me, that was not a nightmare. It was a constant struggle to get other people's notes with my.
There you go. There you go. And it was a terrible feeling of guilt and shame and all that. So anyway, my point being, if you can sort of, as you're saying, if you can bring that up to the surface, that feeling that you have when you know that you will inevitably be sitting there cursing your former present self, it really does work. The research says that you can actually fire up your brain that way, and you're more likely to take action. What was the other one that really
The other
resonated?
thing I liked is, start small. I guess somebody said, how to eat an elephant, one bite at a time or something like that.
Yeah.
But, combining that idea of starting with something small with the idea of a shitty first draft. Just get started on some small part, and it doesn't matter if it's perfect. It can be crappy as long as you get the momentum going. I think that's really important. And then the Byron Katie question to ask ourselves when we, have a belief that's not productive to our getting things done, asking ourselves, is that absolutely true? That nobody will buy that thing that I want to create, or nobody will read the book I want to write?
Yeah.
Is that absolutely true? No, there's got to be somebody that would read it.
Yeah, and I'm sure as a clinical psychologist, you hear this more than most people. So you probably have a pretty good library of possible irrational avoidance statements, right? That we all use.
Well, let me throw this other one, which probably starts this whole cycle. My struggle often is deciding what to do. And then, not that I procrastinate, it's I've got so many ideas and things I would like to start. Well, which one,
Yeah, that's a classic. Can I share a little something
go ahead.
on that?
That's the question.
Because that's actually the inability to prioritize is a form of perfectionism, right? Granted, it's we've got a lot going on in our head, and it can feel like just a bunch of confetti, right? And we don't know that's understandable. But a thing that really makes it worse is that we think that there is a perfect thing to choose, and that should become evident to us. If I look at my long to-do list, I should be able to look through those and go, yes, this one definitely. But then we do this, we go, well, but if I do that one, then this one's going to bite me in the butt. Or this one really should be blah, blah, blah. Or this one. And then we get into this whole perfectionist thing. So what I always say is, look, we need to apply some kind of a filter to these. So there are a few filters, and I won't get into detail, but one thing you could do is look, if the gods of doing things only allowed me to do 2 things today, what would they be? In other words, you could do a 3-3-3, which is what's due in 3 hours versus 3 days versus 3 weeks, right? It's not an optimal way to prioritize because you're prioritizing based on urgency, but it's better than just sitting there and staring at them. But here's where I really wanted to go to with regard to that perfectionism, which is, because we could still, if the gods of doing things only allowed us to do things, we could still sit there and be stuck because we actually have 8 things that really could be done or should be done today. So here's the perfectionist solution. If we can't make clear, easy priority distinctions between 3 or 4 or 8 things, it's time to just put a blindfold on and throw the dart, and just randomly pick one, and just wherever that dart lands, you've got to be okay doing the following. And this is part 2 of the hack. So then and I do this all the time. I do this. I write a new to-do list on a little sticky. That's my new to-do list. And then I write the one thing. You won't be able to read my handwriting, but it sort of says, so there's the one thing. We just had an earthquake.
I was wondering why the screen was shaking. Are you you're in California, aren't you?
I'm in San Diego, and that was an earthquake. I've been living here for 10 years almost, 9 years. I've never felt one. That was a doozy.
Yeah, the room shook.
Yeah, that was, unless it was some kind of explosion somewhere. But anyway, listen, so we'll
wrap this up in case you have to leave, you run out of your house. I used to live in LA, so I'm familiar with that freaky feeling of the whole ground shaking.
So anyway, so now you've got a new to-do list and just one to do. And then you take all of your to-dos and you put them out of sight. And now you take this sticky, you put it down right in front of you next to your laptop or wherever that is, and you go, now I have just one to do, the one that I've decided to work on. There are a whole bunch of hacks that I could get into beyond that to help you stay focused and stay on that task, et cetera. But That's a great, because you raised a classic issue, which is that of prioritization and the inability to choose which of many potential to-dos to do. So there you have it.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Alan. So I want to give you a chance to tell the viewers and participants about any events, seminars, products, or promotions that you're offering.
Sure. Well, thank you. And yeah, I would invite you to come to crushertv.com. And on that website, you will see an option to get my free Productivity Accelerator. It's a free 4-video series. And it teaches you how to plan your day like a badass. You'll see, I'm from New Jersey. This is the way we talk. How to run your day like a badass. And then a couple of really powerful procrastination hacks that are sort of relevant to what we've been talking about. But also, just to tell you a little bit about Crusher TV, this is basically a library. It's a membership. It's a library that I've built. It now has over 110 episodes that are basically, each episode is a mini masterclass on procrastination, prioritization, time management, beating the overwhelm, self-compassion, a whole bunch of different topics, and they're all evidence-based. I don't do woo-woo, with all due respect, and I don't do rah-rah cheerleading. Everything is evidence-based, and I know you appreciate that as a clinical psychologist. So stop by Crusher TV. You can watch some previews of episodes. If you want to join, it's only $1 to join. Great. But more importantly, get that free Productivity Accelerator video. It's on the website, crushertv.com.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Alan. And hopefully we'll see you next year.
Hopefully this building will be standing next year. All right.
Okay. Take care.
Take care, George.